Okay, let's get going. So Anin Bojo, Graham Reed, Nishnikaz, Otto Nonjiba, Anishinaabe, and Dao. It's a big honor for me to join all of you as the co-lead of Activity 6. My name is Graham Reed. I hail from unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe Aki, what is currently known as Ottawa within Canada. My dad's side is English and Scottish, and mom's is German and Anishinaabe, and my great-grandfather is from a place called Wakumakon, which is in the Great Lakes area of Canada. Today we're having our multi-stakeholder dialogue focused on weaving diverse worldviews and wisdoms to holistically address climate change. What we'll broadly do, if you've looked at the concept notes, is we'll have a short round of introductory and opening remarks. Of course, we'll open with a good way. We'll then have presentations, brief presentations by our knowledge holders supported from the 7 UN sociocultural regions. Then we'll have a breakout discussion, and we are going to have that breakout discussion based on language groups, just to make it a little bit easier. We'll have a report back, and then we'll conclude. And so that's how the next 3 hours is going to look, and very happy that all of you are involved in this. A reminder for those who need interpretation devices are in the back corner. Channels are 1 for English, 2 for French, 3 for Spanish, and 4 for Russian. I will note that this, alongside every other mandated event, will be recorded. It will be available on our event webpage after the event, and that our documents, including the presentations, will be available on the LCIPP web portal, which is in front of you. If you want to take pictures of those, you can, but rest assured that we will be updating those on the web portal as well. Just some broad housekeeping issues. Plug and play, many of you are likely on that. We don't allow food and drinks within the room. Before you leave, please give your headsets and receivers back, and let's make sure that we can speak slowly and clearly to ensure the interpreters can understand and convey the messages accordingly. If you can't tell, the interpreters are online, and so very grateful for those joining us virtually in order to provide this space as accessible as possible. In terms of organization of the dialogue, when you are interested in taking the floor, just allow us to call on you before you do so, and that'll enable us to allow everybody to speak and to share their voices within these spaces. On the virtual platform, if you are interested, please raise your hand, and we'll be able to call on you if time permits. Please just leave your camera off or until we give you the floor, and we'll be able to provide that space for all of you. The next slide is just the list of participants, and so if you could and if you're willing, please scan the QR code on the screen. This will just enable us to track who's in the room, as well as provide additional information to all of you through the course of the 5 days that we have together. This is the first activity of 5, and on your table in front of you and those who are sitting on the chairs, you may see that there are events through the course of the next 5 days that relate to the mandated events of the LCIPP. This is the first. Tomorrow we have our annual gathering of knowledge holders. On Wednesday we have our event on Indigenous curriculum and material, as well as our youth roundtable. And then on Thursday and Friday we have our report backs to parties, constituted bodies, and other relevant stakeholders for the annual knowledge holders gathering and the annual youth roundtable. I do just want to remind everybody of the UN Code of Conduct and just want to make sure that all participants continue to adhere to that Code of Conduct, including those who are online. This is really just about ensuring the safety and security of all our representatives here, all of you who are bringing your voices and perspectives from your lands, waters, and territories, and just encourage you to familiarize yourself with that Code of Conduct. It is available in all UN languages. To begin the session, we want to turn to my relative Isaka, who will open us with an opening invocation. So I will turn to Isaka Hunake, who is from the Hunake people, in order to open this meeting in a good way. Isaka?
Shabal Mamã. Bom dia a todos. Muito obrigado por dar essa oportunidade de estar aqui. E com todo respeito a meus ancestrais, os mais velhos que estão aqui, vou fazer uma oração na minha língua e deixar a mensagem na minha língua, que essa semana seja uma reunião produtiva e que saímos daqui com algo que podemos se ajudar de cada um de nós. Que possa se concentrar e chamar seu espírito, aquele espírito que você acredita. Haush. Apunama. Ichashume yukakin. Shinakin. Iwapabu imaka. Shinabirakin. Mi shabawa pajukakin. Nanano taushume yukai. Juikin. Mi kushpaun no ichaki. Na wabuta pau bun sawa. Nuku shabawakin. Nuku anchapawakin. Nuku hawara sharabujukin. No miakai. Haush. Obrigado.
Obrigado, Isaka, for opening us in a good way. And I do want to acknowledge that, opening in a good way is not just about creating that space, but it's really about getting our minds ready for the discussion that we are having here together. We did have a last-minute change, and so very grateful for Isaka and showing up within this space for us. So muy obrigado. So what are we here? And hopefully all of you know what we're doing here, but if you don't, I'm going to provide just a very short overview what is the multi-stakeholder dialogue. And I will note that the practice of multi-stakeholder dialogues actually created the momentum to create the LCIPP and the FWG in the very beginning. And so we are, I think, honoring that spirit and creating these spaces to share with one another and to lift up the voices, knowledge systems, and worldviews of Indigenous peoples and have a dialogue with all of us. And so this is activity 7 of our second 3-year work plan. That 3-year work plan is set to conclude at the end of this year. And this is broadly under the functions of climate policies and actions. And basically, these sessions are intended to convene multiple different representatives and actors within the space, including Indigenous peoples, local communities, parties, and other relevant bodies to advance the participation of Indigenous peoples as well as local communities in designing and implementing climate policies and actions. And really, it's the opportunity to translate the contributions in an ethical and equitable way of Indigenous peoples into the broader discussions within the UNFCCC. And so this year, as I introduced in the very beginning, is about weaving diverse worldviews and wisdom to address climate change, but it really builds on the momentum of the last 2 dialogues that we had hosted, one in Sharm about strengthening the participation of Indigenous peoples and those of local communities in research and scientific processes. And then last year, we collaboratively worked with the Technology Executive Committee to focus on transformative technologies and provided space for Indigenous technologies within both areas of mitigation and adaptation, including those related to sciences and innovations. And so really this opportunity here is to continue the exchange, continue the sharing of these best practices and facilitate the development of climate policies and actions that promote that understanding that has been communicated by Indigenous peoples. The focus within this dialogue, and I'm sure many of you are asking, what are these recommendations that have been referenced in the concept note? Fear not, our former co-chair, Yo Mulalap, is going to provide a helpful overview of some of those recommendations. And really, we wanted to use this space as an opportunity to reflect on what those recommendations were and how we communicated them within the previous work plan, as well as within the review of this work plan, and see where we can continue to strengthen our collective work. And so we'll provide an overview of that. We'll invite our knowledge holders to share their reflections, and then we'll look to hear from all of you to continue reflecting and growing on that momentum. And so with that, I'm very honored to invite Asmar Yousifzada, perfect timing, to share opening remarks on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Azerbaijan. So miigwech, and I'll turn to you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Facilitative Working Group of the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, esteemed representatives of Indigenous peoples and local communities, party delegates, honored guests. Good morning and welcome to Baku, a city where cultures, perspectives, and histories converge. It is fitting we gather here in a place that mirrors the very essence of the local communities and Indigenous peoples platform. Just as Baku stands at the crossroads of continents and ideas, so does our platform bring together diverse worldwide and knowledge systems, all aimed at restoring the health of nature, the foundation of all life today and for future generations. The thematic focus of our dialogue today is weaving diverse worldviews and wisdom to historically address climate change. This event is more than a meeting. It's a call to foster substantive exchange and that emphasizes the participation of Indigenous people and local communities in the design and implementation of climate action at all levels. Climate change is a common concern of humankind. No nation, community, or individual is immune to its impacts. Therefore, we must come together and engage in inclusive dialogues like this one to foster a shared understanding of the diverse values of worldviews that can guide our collective action. It's through such unity that we can hope to make meaningful progress. The local communities and Indigenous peoples platform plays a crucial role in facilitating the exchange among Indigenous peoples and local communities, parties, and other relevant stakeholders. By providing an inclusive space for dialogue and collaboration, the LCIPP helps ensure the voices the most profoundly connected with nature are heard and heeded. The recommendations put forward by the Facilitative Working Group in its reports warrant our attention and action. Parties and relevant entities must work towards enhancing the engagement of Indigenous people and local communities. Their experiences and expertise are invaluable to our global effort to address climate change in an inclusive and holistic way. The outcomes from first global stocktake are clear for all of us. We are not currently on the path toward reaching our temperature goals. This reality underscores the urgent need for the global community to enhance our climate ambition and transfer our action. Indigenous people and local communities are often regarded as the stewards of nature, holding a deep connection with the land and water, and respecting nature as part of cosmology kin and Mother Nature. This collective attitude of respect and gratitude, if widely adopted, can inspire the transformation necessary to address climate change and build resilience for all. It challenges LCIPP Multi stakeholder us to rethink and connect with the web of life and adopt practices that are sustainable and harmonious. I invite all participants to actively engage at this multi-stakeholder dialogue. Your contributions today will not only enrich our deliberations here at COP29, but will also resonate beyond, influencing policies and actions worldwide. Let us seize this opportunity to weave together our diverse perspectives and wisdom. Together, we can foster a holistic approach to climate change, one that honors the past, addresses the present, and safeguards the future. I wish all of you a successful and impactful event. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Miigwech, for those thoughtful opening remarks. And so on the next slide, just to provide a brief overview of the recommendations that we're referencing, and many of those are, I think, implementing the spirit of what was shared within the opening remarks from the presidency and from Asmar. So Miigwech for that. So if you may or may not recall, there have been two iterations of recommendations that were made from the perspective of the facilitative working group, the first of which were prepared within the context of the first work plan, mandate number 1, and the second was done just recently in the context of the FWG review. And part of those combined recommendations are those that are developed on the slide here. These are really just a highlight of what they are, and if you're interested in the more specifics, there are links there on the screen, including Activity 6 from the previous work plan. And so in each of these, we provided recommendations to the SUBSTA, which is a subsidiary body on science and technological advice, parties, relevant bodies, and entities inside and outside of the convention. And I think honored to see other representatives of other bodies, including the IPCC here. And so part of that was really, I think, encapsulated by the reflections that Indigenous peoples are advancing solutions to transform the global approach to climate change. And part of that is through the engagement, the ethical engagement of our values, our knowledge systems, and our worldviews into the process. And an element of that was really how do we articulate the concepts and the cosmovision of Indigenous peoples, including, for instance, in the description of Mother Earth and our relationship to that. Acknowledging the distinctiveness of Indigenous knowledge to that knowledge of local communities and the connection of those knowledge systems to identity, values, spirituality, and worldviews. And the way in which that we've been advancing it is really through this ethical and equitable engagement. And part of that is central to maintaining the integrity, credibility, and legitimacy of Indigenous knowledge systems as a knowledge system in itself, and not one that needs to be forcibly fit within a non-Indigenous system. What was shared is part of the overall vision of the FWG and shifting the narrative away from vulnerability towards a strengths-based approach, towards recognizing the unique contributions that Indigenous peoples hold around relationships to the natural world, and as a result, leadership on climate solutions, and the way in which that those systems have been embedded in place over a millennia of relationships that are reciprocal and deep in nature. Of course, we've heard deeply about the importance of adopting and upholding a rights-based approach to addressing climate change, and central to that is the ethical and equitable engagement of our knowledge systems and values into climate policies, both at the international and national level. At the FWG meeting this week, or last week, we heard about the minimum standard of free, prior, and informed consent, and the role of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in engaging with Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems. And then how do we then, on the basis of that rights-based analysis, create space for the ethical and equitable dialogue of these diverse knowledge systems? And then finally, how do we leverage the space created by the FWG to have that institutional conversation about what is required to develop mechanisms or ethical protocols for the engagement of those knowledge systems. And so this, for some of you, this has been on the table in front of you. It's also in more detail within these different reports. If you look at the next slide, we also just speak of specific recommendations that were made to different entities under the convention. Those parties, and there are specific elements recommended to that. The bodies and entities under the broader convention, including, for instance, constituted bodies. And then those outside of the convention, financial institutions, other relevant bodies. And so there are a wide variety of recommendations that have been made and advanced through the work of the FWG. And so the question really now is to evaluate progress on that. How do we continue to build on these recommendations? How do we continue to create space for these recommendations to find weight and value within the overall convention and the UNFCCC process more broadly? That was a very broad overview, and I just invite my relative Yo, former co-chair of the FWG, just to share some reflections on those recommendations. So invite Yo Miguel.
Kumbar Graham. Thank you very much to Graham. As Graham indicated, my name is Clement Yo Mulalap. I'm from the island of Wa'ab in the Pacific country of the Federated States of Micronesia. My respectful greetings to all of you, in particular the members of the FWG, for organizing this dialogue and inviting me to participate. I consider the platform, and especially its FWG, as a calm and inspiring space for myself, and I really appreciate the opportunity to constantly re-engage with this space. As was indicated previously, when I was a member of the FWG, I worked on Activity 6. I was one of the co-leads for developing Activity 6 of the initial 2-year work plan of the platform covering 2020 to 2021. Under that activity, we put together a set of recommendations on enhancing the engagement of Indigenous peoples and of local communities, particularly under the UNFCCC process, but not limited to just the UNFCCC process. I'll try to comment on some aspects of that work to hopefully contribute to this dialogue. As Graham showed in his slides earlier, a majority of the recommendations that came out of Activity 6 were geared towards parties of the UNFCCC, as well as relevant bodies and processes under the UNFCCC. And they had to deal with the engagement of Indigenous peoples and of local communities through the development of NAPs, NDCs, communications, and so forth. In the interest of time, I won't talk much anymore about those recommendations pertaining to actions under the UNFCCC process, and hopefully those will be more fully discussed as the dialogue goes on. Instead, for the remainder of my remarks, I would like to focus on a particular element of the initial recommendations from the FWG to relevant bodies and processes outside of the UNFCCC process, which I think helped contribute to a holistic global approach to climate action with the respectful involvement of Indigenous peoples and of local communities. Graham highlighted a couple or three of those recommendations from the initial work plan, as well as the current work plan that pertain to bodies and processes outside of the convention. There were three that stood out. Number one, there was a recommendation for those other bodies and processes to collaborate with the FWG in discharging its work. There was another recommendation on respecting, promoting, and considering, among other things, the rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities when taking action under those other bodies and processes. And there was one on upholding the principles of free, prior, and informed consent when engaging in those outside bodies and processes with the knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples and of local communities. Initially, when the FWG, during my time, developed our work plan, we had not planned to spend that much time on that element of bodies and processes outside of the convention, but we were very encouraged by the active participation of representatives from different bodies and processes outside of the convention, including from the CBD, FAO, and so forth, as well as participation of representatives of Indigenous peoples and of local communities in the FWG who also participated in those other bodies and processes. So we try to capture what we heard in those meetings. And so over the last several years, since the adoption of those recommendations in the initial 2-year work plan, I have seen a number of developments across sort of the international intergovernmental negotiations landscape that, in my view, are inspired by or related to some of the work that the FWG has done, especially its participants, in fostering a collective, holistic, global approach to climate action and climate-related action. I'm just going to list 5, and then I'll finish. The first one has to do with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework under the CBD a couple of years ago, which has really robust language on rights of indigenous peoples and of local communities. And of course, you have a target there on climate action. The second, more recently, was the establishment of a new subsidiary body on Article 8J and other provisions of the CBD that took place in Cali, Colombia. And as colleagues may be aware, this body will have sort of an institutional arrangement with participation of representatives of indigenous peoples and of local communities. And of course, the CBD does a lot of work with climate. There's also quite a bit of language on indigenous peoples and on local communities and their knowledge systems in the work under the so-called BBNJ agreement. So this is focusing on marine areas beyond national jurisdiction. Coming from an island, this is of particular interest and importance to me. And we were able to get robust language into the BBNJ agreement, recognizing indigenous peoples and local communities and the relevance of their knowledge through a rights-based lens. And at the moment, also connected to the ocean, there are discussions at the International Seabed Authority on the draft regulations to exploit mineral resources in the international seabed area. And there is a proposal from representatives of indigenous peoples and of local communities to establish a new committee under the International Seabed Authority on underwater cultural heritage because of the relevance to their cultural interests. And as you might be aware, the work of the ISA, the authority, is relevant to climate action because the resources being considered by the ISA are supposed to assist in the energy transition. And at the moment, there are ongoing negotiations as well for a new treaty on plastic pollution. And there are efforts to incorporate language on the relevance of the knowledge systems of indigenous peoples and of local communities and their participation in this work. And of course, as you might be aware, the plastic pollution negotiations are relevant to climate action because the plastics are made from fossil fuels. And we have some overlaps there. And so to conclude, in my view, it is clear that when parties and states collaborate ethically and equitably with representatives of indigenous peoples and of local communities, as I have seen in these different spaces, we can collectively produce outcomes that are far-reaching and meaningful across multiple spaces. But there needs to be constant follow-up and consistent action in this regard. The platform, and especially the FWG, in my view, play important roles in this regard. So I encourage parties, as well as representatives of indigenous peoples and of local communities, to continue engaging actively in this space, make the necessary judgments to the work that we've done so far, and work together to tackle the climate change crisis within and beyond the UNFCCC process. And you have a whole bunch of recommendations to help you do that work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yo. Really helpful and really appreciate those reflections. We're now going to turn to our knowledge holders to share their reflections, highlighting good practices within their lands, waters, and territories, or just like Yo prepared, reflecting on the implications of the recommendations that the FWG has produced for processes either inside or outside of the convention. And so basically what we'll try to do is we have 7 representatives currently from the 7 UN sociocultural regions. We will invite each of you to share any existing best practices or good practices or wise practices that you have from your regions. We will ask you just to try to keep it to about 5 minutes, only because we then want to create space to break out and to hear from the other participants around the circle. And so we're a little bit behind, but not too much, and we'll be able to get back on track. And so I'm going to start and invite my relative Aishatu Ali from the Africa region to start those reflections, and then after I'll go to Per Olaf and continue around the circle. So let's start with Aishatu.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. I am Aishatu Ali from the Mbororo Indigenous Pastoralist Community in Cameroon, and I wish to use this opportunity and thank the FWG for giving me the opportunity to talk on behalf of Africa. As I would say, indigenous peoples' communities around the world have long lived in close connection with the natural environment, often having developed sustainable practices over centuries. This wealth of knowledge, passed down through generations, offers valuable insight into how to live balanced with nature. The involvement of indigenous peoples in the development of National Climate Change Adaptation Plans, NAP and NDC, is essential for creating policies that are not only inclusive, but also effective in addressing the specific vulnerabilities and needs of these communities. Africa has diverse indigenous peoples groups, the pastoralist and forest-dependent communities. Some countries have recognized the importance of including indigenous peoples and integrating indigenous knowledge and perspectives into climate change policies and actions. For example, some of the best practices in Africa regarding involvement of indigenous peoples in the development of national climate change policies are the NAPs and the NDC. Recognition of indigenous people and practices. Indigenous communities in Cameroon possess invaluable knowledge about the environment, biodiversity, and sustainable resource management. This knowledge is critical for adapting to climate change. National policies in Cameroon have increasingly recognized the need to incorporate traditional ecological knowledge, which complements scientific data and provides some context-specific solutions. This we have seen in Chad and DRC Congo, where indigenous peoples' knowledge holders and practitioners were involved in jointly developing the national adaptation plans using their traditional knowledge. Participation in national policy-making process in the stakeholder consultation is another best practice. Another best practice has been the targeted and dedicated inclusion of indigenous representatives in consultation and dialogues related to climate change policy design, e.g. in Kenya, and recently Cameroon and other inclusive indigenous peoples in national task forces and multi-stakeholder platforms for the development of policies. This participation ensures that indigenous voices are heard and that policies reflect their specific needs, experiences, and ways of life. The third practice is strengthening indigenous rights in national policy. In Cameroon, one of the key best practices has been the alignment of national policies with international frameworks like the protection of indigenous people's rights, such as the UN DRIPS, through joint annual celebration of International People's Day. That is a platform to also advance indigenous people's rights in the context of sustainable self-determined development, including climate change. We know we still have a long way to go, but the approach to involve indigenous people in the development of national climate change adaptation plans demonstrate a growing recognition of the value of indigenous knowledge, rights, and participation. The importance of inclusive policy design, community-driven adaptation, and respect of indigenous governance and cultural practices can help drive climate change resilience and scale actions. By continuing to prioritize the integration of indigenous voices, parties can develop climate adaptation strategies that are more equitable, effective, and resilient to the impact of climate change. Despite all this, there is still a gap in the inclusion of indigenous people in policy-making spaces at the level of the climate change discussion. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Fantastic, Aissatou, and also very grateful for being perfectly on time. So excellent preparation. We'll move to our relative representing the Arctic region, Niels Per-Olof.
Thank you for the opportunity to share some experience and some good practices on effective participation and unused potential in design and implementation of climate policies and actions in Sapmi and Arctic. I am born into and have lived all my life with the reindeer husbandry on the tundra in the subarctic parts of Sweden, the land we call Sapmi. Reindeer is a unique animal in the way that it thrives in areas where there is snow parts of the year. We Sami people depend on the reindeer, and our livelihood depends on the Arctic snow. Reindeer herders observe, among other things, that the weather has become more extreme, with sudden heavy rains or snowfalls, or scorching spring water sun. We also feel that the season have shifted to longer, warmer and wetter autumns, while the long, stable, cold periods during winter have more or less disappeared. Several reindeer herding elders say that don't recognize themselves anymore because the observation and knowledge accrued over centuries no longer match the reality. For a long time, the changes in the climate occurred quite slowly. Herders say that the most significant change noticed have taken place in 2000 and 2010, where the weather patterns have changed significantly, which also have had major consequences for the reindeer management. In addition, herding communities' ability to adapt to the climate depends on coping with the other forms of land use and different types of decisions related to management and legislation. This often adds another complicated layer. In response to these rapid changes and challenges to the self-management of reindeer herding communities in Swedish Sapmi have recently carried out climate and vulnerability analysis and development action plans for their own herding community. Several actors have been involved in this. The country administrative boards of reindeer husbandry area and the Sami parliament have together set aside resources for this work, and the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute has participated with expert advice and support in delivering and interpreting climate data. Based on their own climate and vulnerability assessments and needs, herding communities have carried it out with adaptations work. I believe that this community-led example and action plan with clear goals and measures showcases how reindeer herding communities, relevant decision makers and authorities can work together proactively for the reindeer husbandry and Sami culture to be better prepared in facing the challenge expected with a changing climate. As all reindeer herding communities have different geographic and local conditions, circumstances and challenges, adaptations can be understood as a one-size-fits-all thing. It needs local level ensuring and context. In conclusion, the full recognition of indigenous people's right to self-determination in decision-making is crucial in order to build capacity for adaptation, resilience, and healthy societies. This will require transforming current governance systems and ensuring our full and effective participation, a wider perspective for action in those needed, a right-based multi-stakeholder approach where indigenous knowledge is actually valued and used in processes that facilitate the creation of adaptation strategies and that are sustainable, not only economically and environmentally, but also culturally and socially sustainable for us. As steward of the land partnership with the indigenous people in development of national, regional, and local policies and legislation is fundamental to effective climate action. There are the conditions I would like to leave for my children and the future generation of reindeer herders, so they can build their lives around the same way of life I entered for my parents and grandparents. Thank you for your attention.
Excellent. Thank you so much, and again, quite perfectly on time. So we're going to move to our relative from the Asian region, Joey. I know you're going to do some opening remarks, and then we'll show a video. Joey.
Hello. Okay, thank you. From Asia, one of the best practice that we do is this community-led renewable energy, where we don't just provide technology, renewable energy to the villages, to the remote area, but we also help them doing capacity building and preserving not just their culture but also their forests, their land, their territories. And for the past 20 years, we've been doing this, especially in Malaysia, in Borneo. We've been developing more than 40 systems in Malaysia, and now we have other systems in other parts of Asia, such as in Philippines, in North Kalimantan, Indonesia, and also in Nepal. And one of the example of the system will be shown in this video. Thank you.
So we're just waiting to put that video up.
In this project, women plays an important role where they are not just the one who are going to run this center where they do their economic activities. They also be the one who going to take care of the center in terms of maintaining the solar system. This center give space for the women's group to do their socio-economic activities where they can sell their product such as craft, agriculture product, and also sell food, their homemade food. We are hoping that one of the target SDGs in this project is the SDG 1, where there is no poverty, where the socio-economic center help the women to gain some financial in their household.
Impact bagi kehadiran solar hybrid yang ada sekarang ini membuat keselesaan besar lah bagi kami penduduk di Kampung Walau ini. Yang pertama adalah kami dapat anak-anak ataupun anak-anak muda lah dapat belajar dengan begitu sangat selesa lah berbanding dengan beberapa tahun yang lalu. Yang lalu-lalu kami hanya menggunakan lilin, minyak tanah sebagai satu pelita untuk anak-anak belajar. Tetapi sekarang kami begitu sangat gembira lah sebab hadir dengan adanya solar hybrid yang ada sekarang ini membuatkan kami merasakan satu kelegaan penuh lah.
Dan di Kampung Walau ini sebenarnya sudah ada
solar hybrid pada tahun 2019, di mana kapasiti ini hydro, solar hybrid ini cuma berkapasiti sebesar 10 kW, tapi disebabkan permintaan tenaga itu lebih besar selepas beberapa tahun, kali ini kami mendapat dana yang lebih besar untuk membesarkan sistem solar hybrid di Kampung Walau ini. Jadi pada waktu dahulu 2019 yang lalu sistem ini hanya berkapasiti 10 kW, tapi pada masa sekarang kami telah membina bersama-sama dengan orang kampung sistem solar hybrid sebesar 20 kW lah. Pada masa akan datang sistem ini bukan saja dapat menampung elektrik ataupun penggunaan di rumah-rumah, tetapi juga dapat membantu penduduk kampung untuk menjalankan aktiviti sosioekonomi mereka.
So this is a solar hybrid system that is 20 kilowatts. This is powered by 4 inverters, each of 5 kilowatts, and 4 batteries, 10 kilowatt each, so that's 40 kilowatt hours of battery. And then the panels will charge the inverters, and the battery will be converted to AC, which will then be transmitted to the village.
This project is quite unique because we are going to upgrade an existing system that was put in, I think, in 2019. But because of the growth in the community, the system have already not enough to supply the whole community. So we're going to make it into a hybrid system, combining pico hydro and solar into one system. And this is also one of our strategy to make our system more climate resilient. As we know, as we face climate change, we have been experiencing very extreme weather condition where it's too dry or it's too wet. So it's not really conducive for one single system.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And yeah, really powerful video. And so very grateful for that. We know that there are many other videos from many other regions as well. And so this is a good opportunity to pitch the resource hub on the LCIPP web portal, where we can actually create that space of exchange amongst regions following the rights-based protocols that we had prepared. We are just going to skip a representative, come back, and so I'm going to go next to our relative from North America, go to Sunshine, to share a perspective for 5 minutes, and then potentially go back to our representative from Russia.
Yedek Shish Tan Squaquash Dunstan Moore is Squaquash, which translates to sunshine. I am of Nicaraguan and Yakima nations and tribe. At the core of climate action is indigenous knowledge, sciences, and ways of knowing. Indigenous knowledge is generational. My mom taught me how to fish. My grandpa was the one who taught her, and his father and grandfather taught him. 4 generations, going back over 100 years. I'm the 5th generation, and unless we have actionable change, that knowledge will end with me, because our rivers are getting warmer and our fish count is going down. I'm from the hotspot of Canada, Kumsheen, also known as Lytton, British Columbia. We earned that name decades ago, but now we're known as the hotspot of Canada because 3 years ago, after 4 days of extreme heat, the community of Lytton burned down. It was the response during and after the Lytton Creek fire that ignited my fight in climate policy. The Government of Canada has been growing and integrating Indigenous peoples and knowledge into legislation, regulations, and policies. In 2023, Canada published its first national adaptation strategy, and it was acknowledged that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities experience disproportionate impacts from climate change that is compounded by historic and ongoing trauma stemming from colonization. This past June, a bill was passed for the development of a national strategy on addressing environmental racism and advancing environmental justice. Indigenous communities in Canada face some of the highest rates of environmental racism. Speaking on colonialism, trauma, and racism is not directly positive, but the long-term erasure of these issues has caused systemic harm. By acknowledging Canada's colonial history, it provides the space for communities to heal, to fill the gaps that have been felt by Indigenous communities, and ensure that Indigenous peoples are included in policymaking. It is uncomfortable to talk about colonialism, racism, and injustice. But for there to be an equitable and meaningful action, we have to look at the full picture of how we got here. Acknowledgement is impactful, but it's not action. Action is needed to further climate action, enhance Indigenous rights, and ensure that no one is left behind. I've had the privilege to sit in on the First Nations Joint Committee on Climate Action, seeing from a high level of how First Nations are being involved with multiple government departments in relation to climate. Pulling from my youth side, I recently completed my term on the Environment and Climate Change Canada's Youth Council. Myself, along with one other First Nations youth, we had the opportunity to advise on multiple issues within our roles. It was an opportunity to be in the government space as a young person interested in policy, climate, and the environment. My capacity, confidence, and knowledge came from sitting on the ECCC Youth Council. So now, I, as a young person, am able to sit here in this dialogue. Being in colonial spaces can be very mentally draining, but it is my Indigenous friends and family I've made here that inspire and keep that fire lit in me. To reiterate myself, at the core of climate action is Indigenous knowledge, sciences, and ways of knowing. It is the grassroots actions that are safekeeping 80% of biodiversity, protecting our communities, and fighting in the front lines. We have the opportunity to create systemic change in boardrooms, but while we're negotiating, it is our grassroots kin who are ensuring that we have clean air, water, and land. It's through their efforts and sacrifices we will have a planet. Kukstem, thank you.
Fantastic, Miigwech, Sunshine, really, really important words. We'll continue. We are just working through some broad logistics, but I would invite my relative from Latin America and the Caribbean, Lola Cabnal, to share some remarks as well.
Well, thank you very much. I know I don't have a lot of time and that we need to be brief. So I'm Maya Kekchif, and I would like to share with all of you an experience that we have from my community to fight for food sovereignty. Of what we do every day, every minute in our households, in our communities. For us, harvesting corn planting is something that is the basis for our livelihoods, for our families, for our communities. And why? Because for us, corn is what we use to cook our tortillas and to eat. And in this sense, I would like to tell you that part of this practice that we carry out is that we learn this from our parents, our grandparents, and now we show our children how to do it, because this is a way of doing our food sovereignty practices to keep them also adaptable in face of any climatic event. We do is we select the corn with a lot of care, and then we need to keep it during 3 months we take it care, we keep it elevated, and then 3 days before putting on Mother Nature, we prepare a ritual. And what we do during this ritual is to ask permission to the 4 cardinal points. We asked them that when this corn enters Mother Earth, has the best protection, and we ask our brothers and sisters, animals, plants, the forest, we ask all of them for them to eat it as well, because the corn is for them as well. And so that's what we do. This is how we conceive it. And we do this ritual collectively. But what does it happen now with these phenomena when we have floodings, for example, and these practices become more and more challenging due to all these extreme weather events that end up causing terrible problems in our territories with all the droughts, the floods. And so we think that Mother Nature is listening to us, because we do not only keep the balance with Mother Earth, but we keep a communication with our mountains, with the jungle, with our Mother Nature, and we always ask to the earth of the sky and the earth of the land, and we ask to our brothers and sisters in the forest, the animals, the rocks, we ask them to have a successful harvesting. And that's why we do this ritual before cropping. When we get this product, this corn, the first product we manufacture, we also take care of it. We give it to people. We don't eat it ourselves. We gift it to our brothers, our sisters, so they can enjoy it and eat it as well. And so they can also take advantage of this harvesting. And this is the way we keep our system to have this production system. Now, in recent years, due to the impact of climate change on Mother Nature, due to contamination, pollution in our rivers, and we are trying to keep care of our forest, and we're feeling all these challenges, all these climatic challenges, and we, the men and women, the indigenous people, we're suffering all of this, and our rights are also being impacted, because we're seeing how our peoples are being criminalized, both women and men, and of course we are affected by it, not only as humans, but Mother Nature is also affected by this phenomenon, because Mother Nature is a part of all. We are not different from Mother Nature. We are the same whole thing, Mother Earth. At the end of the day, is Mother Earth the one that's feeding us? That's why we exist, and that's why we demand that this is our rights as indigenous peoples, but also this is the right of Mother Earth. Because at the end of the day, it's thanks to her that we live, that we can develop sustainably. It's thanks to her that our sons and daughters have good lives, the lives they deserve. And so these are the practices that we are carrying out in our communities, and thanks to these we have a life sustainable. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Lola.
Well, thank you very much, Lola.
Reflections, and very grateful for your contributions. We are going to go to Amina from Central Eastern Europe, Russia, Central Asia, and Caucasia, and we know that there'll be a slideshow played as she shares.
Здравствуйте. А можно видео включить?
My name is Amina Akashova. I am from the indigenous Republic of Khakassia. In the southern Siberia, in the Altai, there is a land which is safeguarding the history of the Turkic-speaking languages and nations. The land of Khakassia is filled with the spirit of our predecessors. They got a lot of information and traditional knowledge about the nature. The traditional knowledge reflects our predecessors' knowledge to improve the sustainable life and existence of the future generations. The interconnection between our nation, our people with the land, nature is very, very strong. They have been worshipping the spirits of the water, of the air, of the earth, and maintaining the balance is safeguarding the balance of the Khakas traditions are also very much related to all of these ceremonies. Our predecessors understood the role of the earth and water for the sustainable development of the people on the earth, for the rational utilization of the natural resources, and the most early cultivation systems of the Khakassia are dated back with the 8th century before Christ, before Christ. And now, as it used to be in the past, the artificial irrigation is still very, very important for the cultivation of the lands. As an example, the direct irrigation channels, in the area of the Suki River, the channels which have been cultivated and constructed many years ago, the mountain chains is height is 200 meters, and this is all a representation of the oldest observatory. And there are a lot of other irrigation channels which have been restored. But today, due to the hydrocarbon development, all of these irrigation channels have been unfortunately delimited, and indigenous population have been migrated. But we do not only have the coal at the area of the, we also have the golden mines. At the moment, we are deprived of the potable water, and the indigenous people cannot have their traditional household activities. However, if you look at the relationship between the indigenous population and the land where they are living, it's a fundamental requirement for their interrelation between each other. The people of Khakassia are not full-time are not full-time the autonomous people which can enjoy full freedoms and full rights. Unfortunately, that we have faced with the challenges of the industrialization. We have seen so many global climatic challenges. We have to stand up. We have to just stop it and look into ourselves, and we have to use the knowledge of the traditional tribes, traditional indigenous people which have been living in these lands for the centuries, and we have to take this into consideration in coping with and the climatic changes and the challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Possible with folks. All right, we're going to go to our last knowledge holder from the Pacific region. We'll invite Patrick to share.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Patrick. I'm from Papua New Guinea, and I work with the people in the four part of the province within the Southern Island, Western, and Gulf. That's where the logging areas, big challenges, with challenges with the logging, the big mining, and just, oil and gas project is going there. People get money, and then they destroy all the environment. And I started with people there since 1994. Then until now, we are still fighting to preserve and protect the human rights and environment because they destroy. So we, as a local landowners, we started, and then we built the community resource centers because the environment itself it's all connected with the culture and tradition, knowledge and skills. So we don't want to lose that environment. Once we see that logging is destroyed, they don't have a proper bridges, road, and everything is just gone. And then we have nothing left behind for our future generations. So we more doing community awareness, forest biodiversity community conservation program within the 3-4 part of the province. And we're still working to preserve that our cultural heritage. And currently we are working with the different organizations, with the UNF, sorry, not UNF, but WWF, World Wildlife Fund for Nature, and some of the local CBOs within the area. And our aim is trying to preserve that whole entire area as a community conservation program. And it's going to be owned by a community themselves. It's not going to be owned by me, but we have our own landowners. They are the one that they're more interested to protect the environment. So we, as a local landowners, we educate them, we train them, we develop how to build protect the environment. So we have big challenges like earthquake, hit in 2018. It was a big disaster. So we went and then we sought out. It's 100 people died inside, and we couldn't find it. It's because of the climate change. And because of those big mountains and surrounded by big mountain, and people they build a house on the valley, and once the landslides come on, it's finished. Whole village finished, complete off. And you know why that happened? It's because of it's a climate change, and climate change is a real something. It's not funny. It's a big challenge. And I lost those people, and I couldn't find it, their bones and their houses and all this. They go for good. So this climate issue for us is like it's a big issue, and it's a world issue, and we need to tackle that problem. How can we solve this problem? Yeah, because I work with the people, and then I feel sorry for them. I'm so sorry for them. And some of them, they went to in a big flood, and they took them, and then they went to the sea, and then I don't know where did they go. Fish may eat fish, maybe crocodile fish, those eaten by pieces and finished, all gone. So it's big challenge, and this climate change is a real something. So we have to find some means and ways to find how can we save those people who are living. And especially it's that issues, it's go across the whole Pacific Islands. It's not only us, but it's go straight because that's a big problem there. So we as a community development workers, we work with the people in very remote areas. Sometimes they have no network. Sometimes we have no internet services. How can you need a support and help? All those issues all around especially in Papua New Guinea, that where I came from, Then I face that problem. It's not only me, but the people who stay near our next. So that's why we call this. This is to trying to save our own entire Papua New Guinea and the Pacific has to come together and trying to fix those problems, because those affect. Maybe you get some tsunami disaster hit in different areas, and we face that problem. So all of us, facing the problem. So this climate issue is a really something. So we are living in one world. So we need to fix this problem. Thank you.
There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much, Patrick. Really, really powerful reflections. And maybe we can just have one more round of applause for all of our knowledge holders and all of what they've shared within this space. We know that it's a challenging space and appreciate those reflections that Sunshine bring, but very grateful for all of you and showing up and sharing your truths within this. We're now switching to the part of our agenda where we want to hear from everybody around the circle. And so what we're proposing to do, we know that we're a little bit behind, but we'll propose that we do basically 60 minutes for discussion within what we're calling consultation circles or collaborative circles or opportunities to really discuss from the specific positionalities that all of you bring within these spaces, whether it is parties, whether it's representatives of constituted bodies, Indigenous peoples, other organizations. Really, how can we reflect on the recommendations that were shared, reflect on the contributions of the knowledge holders, and look to continue growing the space, place, and opportunities presented from the FWG and the recommendations that were shared. And so basically what we're going to do is we do have 5 or 6 or even 7 FWG members around the room. What we're going to do is we'll split up into at least 5 groups, and those 5 groups will be in English, Russian, Spanish, and we're working on Portuguese, working on French to see if we have the critical mass of all of those. But ultimately, we're inviting you to share your reflections on these 2 questions that are relevant to your specific positionality, whether that's the party, or whether that's an Indigenous representative or others. And really, those are 2 questions. Have you observed progress on the implementation of the recommendations within your area of work? And Yo helpfully shared 5 examples of that at the international level. So two elements of that. If yes, what actions have been taken to achieve such progress? How can that progress be further strengthened? And if no, what could be taken to improve that implementation? And when we think about the context of parties, and we're very grateful for the about 10 parties that we see around the circle currently, and how your country has done this, how your country has strengthened the engagement, and our relative from Africa, Aisha, too, shared examples within the NDCs and the NAPs. And so how do we do that? And then other bodies outside, how does this specifically apply within the work that you're doing? And I know Vice Chair of the IPCC, Ramon, is here. And for instance, how do we think about this work within the context of the broad work of the IPCC itself? So what I would propose to do is that our 5 FWG members who have agreed to facilitate, put your hands up. And so I'll invite a hand up from Emily, from Edna, from Radha. Gunbrit, I'm kind of volunteering you, from our relatives Onel and Walter to help Kathy if you're interested and available, and then Daria as well. And so we'll just ask maybe to split within this space into the different corners of the room. You can move the chairs, and we'll have that discussion for about, I'll say 55 minutes or so, and then we'll invite you to come back. We will ask you to briefly report on those discussions. And so if those facilitators could identify a rapporteur, we also have notes and templates for those notes to be taken. And so would invite you to fill those out, and we'll invite those back into the circle. So that, again, we'll have our FWG members facilitate those discussions, and then we'll come back in about 55 minutes or so. So Chimigwech, and look forward to hearing those discussions throughout the room. So yeah, it looks like there's an English one in this corner, maybe our Spanish relatives in that corner. We can have our Russian relatives maybe here in the middle, and another English one in the back corner there. And then if there are the Francophones, maybe they'll be in this corner with Marie-Philippe. All right, everyone, 2 minutes before we come back to the table. 2 minutes before we come back to the table. All right, everyone, 2 minutes and then we'll come back to the table. I don't think, yeah, there we go. All right, 2 minutes and then we'll come back to the table, everyone. All right, folks, 1 more minute and then we'll get back started here. All right, folks, let's rejoin the table, rejoin the circle with all of us. Give our rapporteurs a minute or two to just think about the messages that they're sharing. Invite you back to the table. All right, folks, 30 seconds and we'll get started. We'll invite our teams to wrap up their final discussion. We'll invite you to rejoin the circle in order for us to shift to the next part of our agenda. So invite you to wrap up those final questions and then come join us back at the table. A reminder, there is interpretation available, and if you haven't already grabbed your interpretation devices, they are in the back corner there. And so would invite our new participants to grab those interpretation devices in the back corner. So welcome again, folks. We'll invite you to join us Please join us at the table. There's lots of space. Lots of space, and we'll now have an opportunity for those small group discussions, which looked very, very engaging, and folks looked like they had a lot to contribute. I'm so really grateful for all of our facilitators, but also all of our participants as well. If we'll get started maybe in 30 seconds as folks settle down. What we're going to do for the last 45 minutes or so, hear some report backs from those tables, invite some very brief reflections, and then move to our closing remarks from our co-chair, Walter. So I see folks coming back to the table. All right, I think we're going to get started here, folks, just because I want us to have enough time to hear from everybody, but I also want us to have enough time to hear back from our co-chairs and other reflections. So very grateful for all of you. Maybe let's just give a round of applause for each other working in those groups. We really do love to see the interaction, and we're really grateful for all of you contributing. And in order to continue reflecting and ensuring an appropriate characterization of those discussions, on the screen you see an email address, lcip@unfccc.int. Please send us your notes, whether those are pictures of your notes or if you're really organized and you took them on your computer, please send them either way to us. So we had 5 groups and 4 different languages. And so we had a Russian group, 2 English groups, a French group, and a Spanish group. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite each of those groups to provide a very short recap of the discussion that was shared. I think what I'd propose is that maximum 4 minutes, just because we want an ability to hear some reflections from other organizations around the circle. And so if that makes sense, I might invite our Spanish-speaking group to provide the first reflection. Maho, I see you're ready. And then I think I'll go to one of our English groups, maybe to our Russian-speaking group, back to an English-speaking group, and then end with our French-speaking group. And so we'll do that in that sequence. Invite you to share a maximum of 4 minutes or so, just the broad highlights so that we can hear how everyone else's conversations have gone. So Maho, over to you.
First of all, I have to say the time is very limited. The reflections were quite productive. And one of the main reflections was the importance of the adoptions inside the reports of the IPCC, especially the 7th one. I believe it is very important that we include the authors that will contribute to this report. Because if this doesn't happen, because if these authors, indigenous authors, are not reflected, our knowledge will not either. Moreover, we said that the IPCC, even if it has contributed to the indigenous knowledge, it still is not addressing the indigenous knowledge as the IPE of the Biodiversity Conference. In that sense, we would say that within the IPCC, the indigenous peoples are still subject, let's say, a case of study, and we are not substantial contributors to the report. Another topic that was also key was about the loss and damages. The loss of the knowledge of indigenous peoples are not mentioned, and they should be taken in account. And that's why we promote that there should be a space within the committee that's destined to work with the loss and damage of indigenous knowledge. Apart from these, we recommend something that we think is lacking within the platform, which is the process of accompanying to the states. There should be a higher socialization, a higher accompanying of the governments within the platform and the framework convention. Moreover, we think we should find a better incidence mechanism so the negotiations can be direct, so this can be taken in account within the negotiations, and everything related to the indigenous peoples can be taken in account. We also, when talking about states, we discussed planification, and we discussed the socialization and building of national action plans or mitigation, and how during these processes, of course, the indigenous peoples are invited to contribute, but their contributions are not always reflected in the final product, so to speak. And so these should be reflected on the national legislations. And from the Latin America group, what I think is the most contradictory is that there is a lack of the implementing of the indigenous people's rights when we talk about the free consent, because most of the consults are not made properly and in good faith. And this is related to the rights matters, the access to lands and local policies. We also spoke about the direct acknowledgement from the side of the states and bureaucratic processes. In this regard, we could highlight intermediation as one of the main problems in all the climate actions in the territories of the indigenous peoples. We also highlighted that the bodies that are here today, the subsidiary organs, we would like to say that there should be a sensibilization and acknowledgement towards ownership and the protection of indigenous people's rights, as these is being sometimes, let's say, used to say that we are participating as indigenous peoples, that our real participation is not as much. Especially when it comes to the implementation of our knowledge and our participation as peoples. We also talked about that in these international spaces, and especially within the convention framework, there should be public funding, and that these should be direct for indigenous peoples. And beyond just receiving funding, we need to create tax mechanisms and governance mechanisms of all the funding that's arriving to is being allocated to states to prevent greenwashing. Moreover, we talked that we should create a precise linking between all the different convention frameworks, including the biodiversity ones, taking into account the certification matters, and taking into account all the work of the subsidiary organs, bodies. This was the main highlights that were discussed in the group. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Miigwech Maho. Contributions of that group. I mentioned we'll go to English next, and so maybe I'll invite either Edna, Gunbrit, or... Okay, I see you.
Thank you. For the Russian group, we had general reflections for the FWG recommendations to parties, bodies, and entities under the Convention and financial institutions, implementing agencies, and other entities. Some of the recommendations include difficulties in getting financing to participate in spaces in some countries. Then there is also long history but limited recognition to participate in climate change spaces. Other parties and relevant institutions recognize indigenous knowledge in terms of financing, implementation, research, and documentation of climate actions. Indigenous policies such as GCF, there are also indigenous advisory group and tracking of how the recommendations are taken up. There is also the need for coordination amongst indigenous peoples to engage with governments. There are no human rights issues of no human rights to climate change solution, e.g. in case of energy access. FGW is a platform to share and elevate different community solutions. Not only share practices, but ways of knowing these practices. More awareness needs to be done on indigenous people and local communities' rights before bringing it out into spaces. We also have localizing LCIPP platforms, sharing of cases. We have limited recognition of indigenous peoples in some regions. But at the same time, we had some strategies to influence processes within the UNFCCC, like engaging through the parties and technical stakeholder dialogue in the global takeoff stock spaces. We also think there should be indigenous voices in all the spaces and mainstream indigenous voices and specific themes in all the UNFCCC spaces. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and very concise, very grateful for that. Let's go to our Russian-speaking. Olga?
Приветствую всех.
Greetings to all. First of all, we would like to express the gratitude to the systemic approach of the existing dialogue. We represent the indigenous people of whose numbers are only sometimes tens or hundreds of thousands of people. We are in a vulnerable situation, but we continue our link to the land and the traditional territories, because to lose this connection it means to lose our cultures, languages, and traditions. As a paradox of the climate change also has some economic advantages. But we believe that the big business should not be the main benefactor of those. But we see that our country is the only country, is the only beneficiary in the processes of climate change, because it has the more extensive access to natural resources. But we are in a vulnerable situation. But we continue to maintain our connection to land and continue our traditional way of life. Understanding the responsibility of the implementation of the recommendations is the main direction for us. There is still a gap between of the decisions made at the global international level and the implementation at the national and local level, and this gap is only growing wider. We remark that in our country there is a local experience. For example, in Sakha-Yakutia, there is a law on the protection of permafrost. The indigenous people, working together with scientific community and experts, they develop strategies and action plans for adaptation at two local local communities, but unfortunately these plans were not considered and were not taken on board, unfortunately. That's why we recommend to include the experts from local communities and indigenous peoples to the development of national plans. The recommendation to the constituent bodies as part of the Framework Convention. First of all, we have to inspect how UN mechanisms are implemented at the national local level. The issue of determination of local communities and indigenous people is still unresolved, and we should pay close attention to that. We applaud the decision on COP16 in Cali on traditional knowledge as part of the Conference of Biodiversity, which gives a new impetus for the continuing our work and synchronization of our efforts, because it allows us to amplify the voices of indigenous people in the UN system. We could have developed a platform for the dialogue of indigenous peoples with academic communities, in the same way as we have this platform for dialogue with governments, in order to put together traditional and academic knowledge and enhance the interaction of stakeholders in the work of the LCIPP ICC and as well as FWG for the transfer of traditional knowledge to facilitation working group. Thank you very much for your attention.
Asba, thank you very much, Olga. Let's go to our second English-speaking group, and I don't know exactly who's reporting. Kathy or Natasha, please.
Kathy? Okay, sure. I can report, that's fine. So, some key points that our group highlighted. I'll make this short just so that we could submit the rest in writing. So the first proposal was in relation to knowledge systems. There was an emphasis that many of the knowledge systems do not exist in books or in videos, but many of them are found in practice. So there was a recommendation that there should be a space within the platform where these various means of communication could be demonstrated, and then some additional effort to translate these practices into some form of language that could be recognized as a means of communication. So some proposals were made around dance, music, the practices of traditional healers. If these could be recorded somewhere and we use the space beyond just written language or otherwise. The second recommendation was in relation to policy, specifically on NDCs and NAPs. An emphasis was made that governments are encouraged to continue to engage with indigenous peoples and local communities. And an additional recommendation that was that many governments in their countries do not recognize IPs or LCs. And so more effort needs to be made in ensuring that governments are introduced to the platform, that there is capacity of states to engage with local communities and indigenous peoples, because to attain equity for participation, there is need that governments also understand the means and ways that they could communicate with indigenous peoples and local communities. So that was an important point. And then the second issue on the policy discussion was that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People emphasizes the need for indigenous peoples to be considered in policy formulations and discussions. So what this means is that it goes beyond the status of being an observer. So recommendations were made that access should be expanded and not limited in this process, so that there is some way that indigenous people could participate in negotiations at the substantive level. So further efforts to ensure this so that there is equal power for engagement and decision making. An additional proposal that was made was that governments should also be held accountable after COPs and other forms of engagement, whether it's annual gatherings or otherwise. It should not only be the task of indigenous peoples or local communities to report back, but governments must also be held accountable to report on what they're doing at national level in implementing the recommendations and decisions that come out of platforms such as this. An additional comment that was made, given an example from Bangladesh, was that efforts are being made, for instance, in curriculums to translate curricula into indigenous languages, but then when this is done, most of these are submitted as optional programs in schools. So again, there's further need for state engagement so that there is recognition of rights. And finally, some activities at national level are considered as criminal activities. So the idea was that usually when indigenous peoples or local communities are making efforts to protect or safeguard ecosystems, the lands or forests, sometimes this is criminalized. So the proposal was that there should be a right to defend lands, but in addition to that, there's need to promote state compliance with the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. So this is a summary of the proposals from the second English group, and we'll submit further in writing. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Natasha. And for those astute observers, we just had our two co-chairs, our first co-chairs within this work plan. And so Onel was on the screen as well. All right, let's go to our last group, our French-speaking group. And I think it's Marie-Philippe and Hindu.
Allô tout le monde, mon nom c'est Marie-Philippe, donc Québec.
Hello everybody, I am a representative from Quebec as an Inuit. First thing we tried to do in our group was to highlight and talk about the representatives who are here and also from the government as well as the CSO organizations. So we tried to understand whether there was a real understanding about what we mean by being indigenous peoples and what it is. And we noticed that the majority of our exchange was to understand and what do we mean, what do we understand by being indigenous peoples and the knowledge of indigenous peoples and how this can be approached and understood. So this was a lot of our exchanges were about the idea that to change our mindset or approach that we have as a Westerner and to see how we can better engage and what we have as a responsibility. And I will try to let Indu continue. Thank you very much, Marie-Philippe. I am here to support her and she asked me to take over. So we talked about both recommendations, one about the indigenous knowledge and how can we ensure that it is respected, acknowledged at the same level than the Western-based knowledge. And for that, we have codes and we have to have protocols in order to ensure that this is respected and we can acknowledge it. We gave a few examples of what we did. We need to foster dialogue between both groups and we want the scientists to understand that the indigenous knowledge goes well beyond about what they do when they tend to just ask questionnaires and pose, but it has to go beyond. And some of the knowledge cannot be translated. There is the one related to ceremonies, and some of them are holy, but also very important and matter a lot when it comes to protecting the environment. In order to do so, we need to have more openness between both sides, and we need to set up kind of protocols and bodies about traditional knowledge, because we will extract that knowledge and we won't be able to share it at the end of the day. So we need to ensure that we have the FPIC, so the free and prior informed consent. And that's the second point, this IPECC. They are very important as a scientific body, but how can they acknowledge the traditional knowledge and mainstream them? So we said they should work hand in hand with IPBS, because they do have more acknowledgement and they've been used to working with indigenous peoples. So working together will generate a lot of learning, and we want this to be opened. The IPCC should be open up so the representatives of the indigenous peoples could be invited to participate and represent, because they don't necessarily have exchanges with what matters, the knowledge of indigenous peoples. We also said, we talked about being co-authors to change the shift the dynamics about research, to acknowledge and recognize how indigenous peoples approach research, and so that this is truly mainstreamed and integrated. So we talked about meaningful involvement. We spent a lot of time. Do we have such a word in French? No, we don't really have a word in French for meaningful engagement. There are a lot of knowledge and things which are constrained by what the language can express. Secondly, we talked about distinction between how we include that knowledge in a much broader way without any limitations. So we talked about how can we approach the indigenous peoples but not speak on their behalf. And we believe there are a lot of progress that can be done, or has to be done, a long way to go. And I believe we need member states who are involved with the to speak to the IPPCC and the representatives of the states, how traditional knowledge can be mainstreamed and integrated whilst complying and respecting their ways of approaching knowledge. Thank you.
Très bien. On va continuer. I think
we are going to continue.
And really grateful for all of those reflections and all of the different breakout groups, consultation circles, discussion circles. All of those were really valuable contributions, and grateful for all of you trying to summarize those under 5 minutes, that we know is very challenging for a long discussion. We have 3 very short reflections from different bodies inside and outside the convention that wanted to potentially speak briefly to those recommendations. And so I think we'll begin just briefly, potentially maximum 2 minutes or so, from our representative from the Adaptation Committee. We have a representative from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and then a representative from the Global or Green Climate Fund that will want to just go very short. And so I'll invite Rita to share from the Adaptation Committee's perspective.
Bon après-midi à tous. Merci de nous avoir invités aujourd'hui ici. Je m'appelle, comme le co-président l'a mentionné, Rita Michana. Je viens du Guatemala et je représente le comité d'adaptation. J'aimerais présenter aujourd'hui certaines nouveautés que les groupes de travail de CC ont réalisé. C'est un plan qui se focalise sur le progrès, les bonnes pratiques et les leçons apprises, les challenges, les défis, les opportunités dans l'application du savoir et des systèmes de connaissances pour l'adaptation. Avant de commencer, pour ceux qui ne le savent peut-être pas, permettez-moi de présenter le comité d'adaptation et son groupe de travail. LCIPP promouvoit l'implémentation d'actions rehaussées sur l'adaptation d'une manière cohérente. Le groupe de travail PAN concerne tous les sujets, sur tous les sujets concernant NAP avec les organisations et en employant.
Members are the Least Developed Countries Expert Group, the Standing Committee on Finance, the Technology Executive Committee, the Adaptation Fund, the Global Environmental Facility, and the Green Climate Fund. Other constituted bodies also contribute to the work of the NAP Task Force, namely the Consultative Group of Experts, the Executive Committee of the Warsaw International Mechanism for Loss and Damage, the Facilitative Working Group on the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform, and the Paris Committee for Capacity Building. The policy brief recognizes the importance of integrating diverse knowledge systems in adaptation responses. And in order to support parties, the NAP Task Force decided to prepare the policy brief to inform different stakeholders on how to further incorporate traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous people, and local knowledge systems into their adaptation efforts. The policy brief includes information on relevance and benefits of including traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems in adaptation efforts. Good practices, lessons learned, and examples from different regions for each stage of the iterative adaptation cycle, as well as enablers including finance, technology, and capacity building, awareness raising, knowledge dissemination and education, and effective institutional arrangements, challenges and opportunities, an assessment of progress in integrating traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge system into adaptation plans, and relevant activities by the NAP Task Force members and contributors. You can find the publication linked at the AC website, UNFCCC/Adaptation Committee. Assessment progress in integrating TILCs into adaptation planning, NAPs, outcomes, and NDCs. Regarding this assessment of progress in integrating traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems into adaptation plans, and analysis of the latest national adaptation plans, national determined contributions with an adaptation component and adaptation communications was conducted. The analysis revealed that a significant number of national reports incorporate indigenous peoples and local communities, including traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems. For example, 91% of NAPs mention indigenous peoples and local communities, 74% of outcomes, and 61% of NDCs. The reference to indigenous peoples and local communities can be differentiated by theme. As you can see, the majority of mentions are linked to adaptation measures, followed by knowledge systems and engagement in adaptation governance, while there are less references to the particular vulnerabilities to climate change and means of implementation. Regarding the number of documents referencing knowledge systems, the majority mention traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems, while some reports mention local or traditional knowledge only. Furthermore, the trends observed suggest an increasing recognition of traditional knowledge, knowledge of indigenous peoples, and local knowledge systems in the information reported on or communicated by parties. For example, 57 updated or new NDCs mention TILCs as compared to 24 previous NDCs. The analysis suggests a positive development in the recognition of the unique knowledge, insights, and practices that indigenous peoples and local communities can bring to the adaptation efforts. Regarding the strengthening and advancing implementation moving forward, the related questions for the multi-stakeholders dialogue on how the FWG recommendations are being implemented and what ways to strengthen and advance their implementation moving forward are: based on the insights from the policy brief, it is clear that more needs to be done to leverage the full potential of applying traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems to adaptation, as well as to adequately and equitably engage indigenous peoples and local communities in the iterative adaptation cycle. Traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems can contribute to developing effective, context-specific, socio-culturally responsive, sustainably resilient, flexible and cost-efficient adaptation solutions when applied in an appropriate way that considers the context and complemented with scientific knowledge. These knowledge
30 seconds
systems...
or so. We need about
Recommendations then. I'll go into the recommendations. Okay. Based on the analysis presented, we believe that enhanced efforts should be made to recognize the relevance of traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local knowledge systems for adaptation, and to integrate these knowledge systems to all steps of the iterative adaptation cycle. The use of traditional knowledge of indigenous people and knowledge systems needs to be implemented with the engagement of indigenous people and local communities, based on principles including mutual trust and respect, involvement of indigenous and local knowledge in all assessment phases, free, prior, and informed consent and benefit sharing, among others, and as appropriate. We believe that it is very important to involve these systems into the cycles of the national adaptation plans in order to ensure that this knowledge can be further engaged in the process of making decisions at the governmental level. And I would add to that the fact that we believe that your voices have to be heard at the governmental level in order for your voices to be strengthened in this process of the UNFCCC. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Rita. Just in the interest of time, unfortunately, I'm not going to call on our representatives from the GCF and the IPCC. I want to give space to our co-chair to conclude, and then also our closing invocation by our elder. And so what I would ask is just that we follow up on the basis of those other topics. Obviously, they were discussed in some of the areas, and Rita shared a policy brief that was just produced by the Adaptation Committee that we can find online. And so with that, I'm going to go to our closing remarks. I'll invite our FWG co-chair, Walter Gutierrez, to share some closing remarks, and then go to our elder to close us in a good way.
Muchas gracias, Greg.
Well, thank you very much, Graham. Before my closure words, I would like to thank our Mother Earth. Thank you for breeding us. We shouldn't harm our Mother Earth. And now I will proceed with my indigenous language. Everything that is within Mother Earth, we should take care of it. This is how we think in the indigenous peoples of Mara, the one I am representing here. Distinguished members and representatives from the indigenous peoples and local communities, dear colleagues, dear friends, by concluding this enriching discussion and exchange on behalf of the FWG, I would like to express our most sincere thankfulness to the representative of the COP presidency. Thank you so much for your inspiring words, and thank you so much to each and all of you for your active participation and your valuable contributions. Over the last hours, we have been seeing the different cosmovisions and knowledge. We have been embodying the essence of this topic. We have expressed the different visions to assess in a holistic way how we can tackle climate change. This multi-stakeholder discussion has been very useful to remember how necessary and inclusive participation is. We were able to listen to different voices, and they are able to express their own cosmovisions, their experiences, innovative approaches for climate action. And the participation of local communities and indigenous peoples has been particularly impactful. I would like to highlight the indispensable role when it comes to the design and implementation of climate actions at all levels. Our discussions have highlighted different key points. For example, the importance of values and knowledge systems from indigenous peoples, as well as all the knowledge systems. We have acknowledged that local communities and indigenous peoples hold generations of crucial knowledge for the collective management of climate change and the environment. We have expressed our deep connection with nature, and this expresses how we can live in harmony with our Mother Earth, with water, and with the rest of the resources. The collective action is essential. It is more than clear that tackling climate change requires a collective action. Governments, organizations need to work together. We need to respect and incorporate different perspectives so that we can create policies that can be effective and equal. Besides, we need to be more ambitious. Our efforts are not enough. We need to accelerate our efforts, and we should meet the objectives when it comes to temperatures according to the Paris Agreement. Respect and gratitude should be our guiding principles. We should adopt this respect approach towards our Mother Nature, and this could inspire the transformative change that we need in order to develop resilience and guarantee a sustainable future for all of us. I am very much inspired by the collaborative approach that has marked our dialogue to exchange our experiences and the worldviews. And this is helpful to have the hope to tackle all the challenges by climate change and to restore the health of our Mother Earth. As co-chair of the FWG, I am committed to guaranteeing that the ideas and recommendations from this dialogue will be the guiding principles for our work, especially within the draft work plan for the 2025-2027 work plan. Let us make the most of this momentum of these dialogues. I encourage you all to continue actively participating in COP29 by enriching our collective efforts with the knowledge and with the experiences that we have shared today. I really hope that this dialogue will be inspirational for you, and I really hope that this will contribute to your participation in Baku and beyond. Now, to conclude, I would like to express my most sincere thankfulness to our hosts here in Baku. Thank you for providing this space. This is a sign of collaboration, and I really hope that this dialogue spirit between the different multi-stakeholders will be inspirational while we work together in the upcoming weeks in order to tackle the challenges posed by climate change. Thank you once again for your collaboration. Thank you for your dedication. Together, we can create a more resilient network so that we can be benefited. I encourage you to participate in the LCIPP events. The Secretariat team will be sharing with you all the details regarding the participation, and you will be included under the participants list. I really hope we can continue collaborating during the COP29 and beyond. Thank you so much.
Yeah, muchas gracias, hermano and co-chair. Really grateful for those powerful closing remarks. I beg your indulgence just to stay so we can hear the closing remarks. And just before I do that, I just want to remind folks, and it was just on the screen, so if you don't mind going to the screen before, this is the first of 5 days of activities related to the LCIPP. Tomorrow, we have our coordination meeting of the knowledge holders in meeting room 11, just outside here. And then on Wednesday, we have our Indigenous curriculum event and our roundtable for Indigenous youth and youth from local communities. And then on the Thursday and Friday is the opportunity to report back those to parties, states, and other constituted bodies. So with that, I'm going to invite our chief, our Maasai chief from the Gora Gora crater to close us in a good way.
Ajo ashe tendaraki enakata nanoto mayianiho aiken ele shani le taata. Naa ore enaituruku aiko ntae enashe naleng iltung'anak pookin oirorita otii COPs 29 tendaraki imakitata enyamali sapuk naata olosho tendaraki ena kibelekenyata naewuo oonkataa tenkop. Kake ore ake sii kiimaitie yiok changamoto sapuk nairowua yiok iltung'anak oing'ua Tanzania olosho ojo le Korongoro nikitum enyamali sapuk neyieu edotuni yiok aara yiok tolosho lang, neyieu emitikini yiok kiwosh enkura nawoshitoi, neyieu emitikini yiok enkulukuoni nejidurrieki yiok ometaa kiandamanare toonkolong'i 5 nikimpotu serikali ang e Tanzania nikimpotu nena olong'i omeetu ang'amaa yiok. Naa ore naa taata anoto ena nafasi nayieu naishoru enashe aiko ena serikali ang ajo kiashe tendaraki eetuo ainining yiok, najo kiashe tendaraki nena naaetuo aibelekenya aisho yiok haki ang matoosh inkurai neho nkishu ang metadaata nepali yiok itudurrieki yiok tolosho lang aworu enkulukuoni ang metaa kijoki serikali ang e Tanzania ashe nikiomonu pee mitoki ashuko kurum, nikiomonu paa ore ntae kulo oota ele tumo ojo le COPs oirorita tombaa olosho pookin nintashekiki serikali nijo ina ang onkulie serikalini nainyalita iltung'anak pee mitoki ashuko kurum peeku ore nkirukokino naatipikaki naayautua tenakata imbaa supati naatosidan enkop nimitokini ashukokino neeku etisipa ena. Nikiomon nkulie serikalini e dunia metareto iltung'anak liasili nerrip pee meoruni nkulukuok enye nemeoruni esipata enye melio naa ajo ore ene netii oltoilo sapuk naa oltoilo lenkai otii amu ore ewueji netii irkumok naa ketii Enkai tenebo ninye. Neeku ore naa tendaraki nena kuti o tendaraki emuto eitu atum enkata nairorie nkumok najoki Enkai ashe, najoki ntae loirorita kuna nikiomon naa serikalini pooki e dunia mitasheki iloshon pookin peyie etum esipata iltung'anak liasili pee minyali amu mekure ishiakino teneoruni iltung'anak enkop arashu etareto olosho lenye liasili otamoo naa ke ore ninche yiok kiramatita enkop, kiramatita ng'uesi, kiramatita ntimi, kiramatita nkishu, kiramatita pooki toki nemetii hoo nyoo nikimba. Kake kiyieu ore peeku serikalini ang natii nikitoni te meza nabo nikirukokino pooki toki amu kinyorr serikali nikinyorr siinye ate. Neeku ajo ashe tenena nikinining'o, najo ashe naa pee elimu ele alashe lai nena kuti natejo kijokito ntae ashe nikijokito entareto yiok pee edumunye ake iltung'anak liasili pee meironyakini enkop piaku kulo arripok oorrip toolubot pookin enkop. Ajo ashe.
Yeah, so Chief Metui Shaudo from Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. he appreciates for having this opportunity to engage with diverse stakeholders, indigenous people, fraternity, and other key stakeholders who attended to these very important sessions. And he highlighted briefly about how the people of Ngorongoro have gone a lot of suffering, struggle, and appreciate the international communities for their support, which finally hold the government of Tanzania accountable. And now the people of Ngorongoro are settled, and they are now, staying with their families, looking after their land, ancestral land, and their wildlife, because the Ngorongoro crater is an ecosystem that, brings people together, the Maasai together, their livestock, wildlife, their forests, water, and everything. So he is the one who led the peaceful demonstration which finally brought the governments on the table and discussed with the Maasai people in Ngorongoro, the people that are friendly to nature, the custodian of the healthy planets, and they were not supposed to be removed from their ancestral land, because they are the real conservators. When it comes to conservations of biodiversity and ecosystem, the Maasai indigenous people are the people of example. They are the people that showed the world that they can conserve for the land, they can conserve for the forest and the biodiversity found in their land. And he said because of the interest of the time, he wanted to talk more about how the knowledge of indigenous people helped in conservation of the ecosystem, forest, and biodiversity. And in those very few remarks, he said now he wants to give us a prayer in the Maasai language, and you just say after him, Nai. So,
Ando munyana.
Nai.
Narwana rangai ndai. Merama ya nangai kop. Merama ya nangai yolo shololonga. Meho andra yangai yasipara. Mirulu yangai rande beakunda sudankai. Merama nandra yangai rolongo yena nasinyat. Mersudundra yangai re kurumbe mesudundra mangadi. Eno range sulara. Eno rasipara. Endo munyana. Endo ropillo. Andra kiro yankai. Merona randra yankai ni nyorusendra yankai. Kida show leng merama ya nandra yankai. Ashi.
Thank you.
Miigwech for closing us in a good way, and really grateful for everybody staying with us for the last 10 minutes. Look forward to seeing all of you tomorrow. Miigwech.